The World Before the Storm. 1871 to 1914. Before the guns thundered and empires fell, the world stood on the edge of greatness and destruction. The early 20th century was a time of wonder. Cities glowed with electric light. Trains connected continents. And the human voice could travel across oceans through the telephone. Science and progress filled the air with optimism. But beneath that bright surface, the old world trembled. Rival empires watched each other with suspicion. Kings, emperors, and generals spoke of honor and glory while preparing for a war unlike any the world had ever seen. This is the story of how the modern age was born in blood. How ambition, pride, and fear dragged an entire generation into chaos. Europe in 1914 was the center of the world. Its empires controlled more than half the planet. London ruled India and Africa. Paris held colonies from Vietnam to Algeria. And Berlin and Vienna sought their place in the sun. Yet everywhere, the shadow of competition grew. After 1871, the continent lived under a fragile peace. Germany, newly united after defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War, had become the strongest power on the continent. Its leader, Otto von Bismarck, sought to preserve peace, not out of kindness, but out of calculation. He knew that Germany, surrounded by rivals, must avoid war at all costs. To keep the balance, Bismarck built a complex web of alliances, secret treaties that tied Europe together like a spider's web. Germany allied with Austria-Hungary and later with Italy, forming the Triple Alliance. Across the map, France and Russia drew closer, bound by fear of Germany's power. By the turn of the century, Europe was split in two armed camps, each side watching the other, waiting for the first move. But alliances were only part of the story. A deeper fire burned in the hearts of nations. Nationalism. Every empire in Europe ruled over many peoples. Germans over Poles, Austrians over Slavs, Turks over Arabs. And everywhere, small nations dreamed of independence. In the Balkans, this fire burned brightest. Serbia, a small kingdom in southeastern Europe, dreamed of uniting all Slavs under its banner, including those still under Austrian rule. To Vienna, this was a deadly threat. To Russia, the protector of the Slavs, it was an opportunity. Here, on the edge of Europe, the spark of the Great War was already waiting. Meanwhile, across the world, imperial rivalries sharpened. Britain feared Germany's growing navy, new dreadnought battleships that challenged its mastery of the seas. France wanted revenge for its lost provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. Russia sought influence in the Balkans and the Black Sea. The more Europe advanced in industry, in science, in wealth, the more it armed itself for destruction. By 1914, Europe was an armed camp. Every major power had adopted conscription. Every young man trained, drilled, and ready for war. Railways covered the continent like veins, ready to carry millions of soldiers to the front at a moment's notice. War was not only expected, it was planned. Generals drew up detailed timetables for mobilization. In Berlin, the Schlieffen Plan aimed to crush France in 6 weeks by sweeping through Belgium. In Paris, Plan 17 dreamed of glory and revenge. In St. Petersburg, Russian generals promised to protect Serbia and attack Germany if war came. Every nation believed the same dangerous lie: that war would be short, decisive, and glorious. None could imagine the trenches, the gas, the endless slaughter that was to come. The rulers of Europe were cousins. Literally. King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were all grandchildren of Queen Victoria. They exchanged letters, visited one another, and posed for photographs in glittering uniforms. To the public, it seemed impossible that such men, related by blood, could destroy each other's empires. But beneath the surface, rivalry, pride, and fear had already poisoned their relationships. Industrialization had made war more deadly. Machine guns, long-range artillery, and modern rifles had changed the battlefield forever. Yet the old generals still dreamed of cavalry charges and glory. The world was modern, but its leaders were trapped in the past. In the summer of 1914, Europe was at peace, and it looked eternal. Cafes in Paris were full. Berlin's streets buzzed with automobiles, and Vienna's music halls overflowed with laughter. It was called La Belle Époque, the beautiful era. No one knew that this beauty would soon be drowned in blood. Within weeks, the old world would vanish forever. Far from the capitals, in the small Balkan city of Sarajevo, destiny was waiting. A young man was about to make history. With a single bullet, the spark, the assassination in Sarajevo. The summer of 1914 began like any other. The skies over Europe were calm, the fields were green, and the cities hummed with the rhythm of peace. In Vienna, waltzes played under golden chandeliers. In London, the newspapers were full of politics and gossip. No one imagined that, within weeks, this peaceful continent would be marching to war. But history often hides its turning points in ordinary moments. And the spark that would ignite the greatest conflict the world had ever seen was waiting in a small city few people outside the Balkans could even find on a map. Sarajevo. Sarajevo was the capital of Bosnia, a province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it was also home to many Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, a crossroads of empires and ethnic tensions. Austria-Hungary had annexed Bosnia in 1908, angering neighboring Serbia, which had long dreamed of uniting all Slavic peoples into one kingdom. To Serbian nationalists, Austria was the oppressor. To Austria, Serbia was a growing threat. Both sides viewed each other with suspicion, and both were quietly preparing for the day when words would turn into war. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, nephew of the aging Emperor Franz Joseph. He was a complex man, proud, intelligent, and often stubborn. Unlike many in the Austrian court, he believed that the empire needed reform. He wanted to grant more autonomy to the empire's Slavic peoples, including those in Bosnia. Ironically, his ideas might have weakened the cause of Serbian nationalism, had he lived long enough to see them through. In June 1914, Franz Ferdinand planned a visit to Sarajevo to observe military maneuvers. The trip was meant as a show of strength, a message to the restless Balkans that Austria's power was still absolute. But to Serbian extremists, the visit was an insult, a provocation staged on June 28, the very day Serbia celebrated the historic Battle of Kosovo, a symbol of its struggle against foreign rule. That choice of date would prove fatal. In the shadows, a secret organization known as the Black Hand plotted revenge. It was a nationalist group formed within the Serbian military, dedicated to uniting all South Slavs under one flag. Even if it required assassination, they trained young men in secret, filling their minds with dreams of sacrifice and martyrdom. Among them was a 19-year-old student named Gavrilo Princip. He was frail, quiet, and poor, not a soldier, but a believer. He saw the Archduke as the symbol of tyranny, and he believed that by killing him, he would strike a blow for his people's freedom. As Franz Ferdinand's visit approached, 6 conspirators were sent to Sarajevo. They carried pistols, bombs, and cyanide pills in case of capture. They positioned themselves along the Apple Quay, the main route where the royal motorcade would pass. On the morning of June 28, the city awoke to celebration. Flags, crowds, military parades. The Archduke and his wife, Duchess Sophie, rode in an open car, smiling and waving as they passed. Then, at 10:10 a.m., the first attempt came. One of the conspirators, Nedeljko Kabrinovich, hurled a bomb at the car, but the driver saw it and accelerated. The bomb bounced off the folded roof and exploded under the next car, wounding several officers. Panic spread through the streets. Kabrinovich swallowed his cyanide and jumped into the river. But the poison was too weak, and the river too shallow. He was dragged out by the police and arrested. The Archduke, shaken but unharmed, continued his visit. He insisted on going to the hospital to see the wounded, an act of compassion that would seal his fate. At around 11 a.m., the Archduke's car took a wrong turn near a narrow street called Franz Josef Strasse. When the driver stopped to reverse, he found himself just a few feet from a small cafe, where Gavrilo Princip happened to be standing. The young man had failed earlier that morning, and was ready to give up. But now, fate had placed his target directly in front of him. Princip stepped forward, raised his pistol, and fired 2 shots. The first struck the Duchess Sophie in the abdomen. The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck. "Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children," he whispered as blood filled his lungs. Within minutes, they were both dead. The world did not yet realize what had happened. In Vienna, news spread slowly at first. To the old emperor Franz Joseph, it seemed almost unreal. His heir, murdered by a Serbian nationalist. But within hours, shock turned to anger. In the cafes of Vienna and Budapest, people demanded vengeance. Across the border in Belgrade, many celebrated. To them, it was an act of liberation. To Austria-Hungary, it was an act of war. The assassination in Sarajevo could have been treated as a tragedy, a crime, not a cause. But the empires of Europe were standing on dry kindling. All it needed was one spark. In Vienna, officials debated their response. The army wanted war, a swift strike against Serbia to crush its nationalism once and for all. But some feared Russia would intervene to defend its Slavic ally. So Austria turned to its most powerful friend, Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II, eager to prove his empire's strength, promised unconditional support. Historians would later call it the blank check, a promise that would set Europe on fire. With Germany's backing, Austria prepared a harsh ultimatum for Serbia. It demanded that Serbian officials allow Austrian investigators to operate inside Serbia, something no sovereign nation could accept. The ultimatum was designed to be rejected. And yet, Serbia tried to avoid war. Its leaders accepted almost every demand, except the one that violated their independence. It was not enough. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The machine had begun to move. Across Europe, the great powers watched with dread and excitement. In Berlin, generals activated war plans. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II faced a terrible choice: abandon Serbia and lose prestige, or mobilize and risk war with Germany. He hesitated, then ordered partial mobilization, hoping for time to negotiate. But Germany saw this as a threat. On August 1st, it declared war on Russia. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France. To reach France quickly, the German army invaded neutral Belgium. That single decision would change everything. Britain, bound by treaty to protect Belgian neutrality, now faced its own choice. Prime Minister Herbert Asquith and Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey knew what it meant. As German troops crossed the Belgian frontier, Britain declared war on Germany on August 4, 1914. That night, as darkness fell over London, Grey looked out the window of his office and whispered words that would echo through history. "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." In a matter of days, peace had collapsed like glass under pressure. Armies mobilized with breathtaking speed. Trains carried millions of men to the front, singing songs of victory. Crowds cheered in the streets, throwing flowers to departing soldiers. Everyone believed they would be home by Christmas. They could not see the storm ahead. The trenches, the gas, the endless death. From the Balkans to the Channel, the world slid into chaos. The assassination of one man had unleashed a war that would consume empires, redraw borders, and kill millions. The spark in Sarajevo had become an inferno, and the age of peace, La Belle Époque, was gone forever. The July crisis and the fall of peace. The summer of 1914 will forever be remembered as the moment the old world lost control of its destiny. In the space of a few weeks, diplomats, generals, and monarchs turned a regional crisis into a global catastrophe. It began with a single assassination in Sarajevo. But what followed was not fate. It was a chain of human decisions, each made in fear, pride, or miscalculation, until peace itself was impossible to save. When news of the Archduke's death reached Vienna, the Austro-Hungarian government stood at a crossroads. Many within the empire saw Serbia as the source of instability in the Balkans. A small, defiant kingdom that had humiliated the dual monarchy for years. To the old men in the imperial court, this was their chance to crush Serbia once and for all, to prove that Austria-Hungary was still a great power. But the empire was fragile. Its armies were outdated, its people divided, and its leadership uncertain. The decision to go to war could just as easily destroy Austria as save it. In early July, the Austrian foreign minister, Count Leopold Berchtold, met with German officials to seek support. Kaiser Wilhelm II and his advisors responded with enthusiasm. They saw a limited war in the Balkans as a way to strengthen Austria, test Russia's resolve, and perhaps secure Germany's place as Europe's dominant power. On July 5, the Kaiser issued what historians now call the blank check, a promise that Germany would back Austria-Hungary in whatever action it chose to take against Serbia. It was a moment of supreme confidence and supreme recklessness. Neither the Kaiser nor his generals understood how fragile Europe's peace had become. They believed the other powers would back down, as they had in earlier crises. They were wrong. Austria's leaders took nearly 3 weeks to prepare their ultimatum. They wanted the world to believe that they were acting carefully, not impulsively. But in truth, every line of the document was designed to be unacceptable. It accused Serbia of supporting terrorism, demanded that Serbia punish nationalist organizations, suppress anti-Austrian propaganda, and allow Austrian police to operate inside its borders. The last demand, the violation of Serbian sovereignty, was the fatal one. No independent nation could accept it. On July 23, Austria delivered the ultimatum to Belgrade, giving Serbia just 48 hours to respond. The world held its breath. In the streets of Belgrade, crowds gathered in silence as government officials debated what to do. Serbia was small, poor, and exhausted from years of war. But behind it stood Russia, the protector of the Slavs. Serbian leaders hoped the Tsar would not abandon them. They sent telegrams to St. Petersburg, begging for advice. The Russian foreign minister, Sergei Sazonov, urged them to accept as much as possible, to buy time for diplomacy. And so they did. Serbia's reply was remarkably conciliatory. They accepted nearly every demand. All but one. They could not allow Austrian officials to operate on Serbian soil. Even Kaiser Wilhelm, reading the reply, admitted that it was more than could have been expected. But in Vienna, it made no difference. The decision for war had already been made. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Within hours, artillery shells were falling on Belgrade. At first, Europe still believed the conflict could be contained. But the machinery of alliances had already begun to move. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II faced a painful choice. He did not want war. But he could not abandon Serbia without losing face at home and prestige abroad. His generals warned that any partial mobilization, limited to Austria, was impossible. Russia's plans were built on total war. Once the order was given, it could not be stopped. On July 30, the Tsar approved full mobilization. Millions of men began to gather at depots across the vast empire. Telegrams poured into Berlin, demanding explanations. To the Germans, Russian mobilization was an act of aggression, a signal that war was imminent. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II paced the halls of his palace, torn between pride and panic. He sent desperate messages to his cousin, Tsar Nicholas, known in private letters as Nicky. Nicholas replied, pleading for time, calling Wilhelm Willy, and asking him to help preserve peace. But their friendship could not stop the armies that were already moving. On August 1, Germany declared war on Russia. The Schlieffen Plan, years in the making, was now set in motion. Its logic was cold and mathematical. If Germany was to fight both Russia and France, it must strike west first, crushing France quickly before the slow-moving Russians could fully mobilize. The plan depended on speed, precision, and, most dangerously, the invasion of neutral Belgium. On August 3, Germany declared war on France. The next day, German troops crossed into Belgium. They expected little resistance. But the Belgians fought back fiercely. The destruction of the city of Liege shocked the world. Reports of atrocities, civilians executed, villages burned, began to spread. Germany's reputation as a civilized nation began to crumble in a matter of days. In London, the British government debated what to do. For years, Britain had avoided firm commitments to any European power. But the invasion of Belgium changed everything. Britain had guaranteed Belgium's neutrality under a treaty signed in 1839. Now, that promise was being tested. Public opinion turned sharply against Germany. On the evening of August 4, Britain sent an ultimatum demanding German withdrawal from Belgium. When it was ignored, Britain declared war. In less than a week, nearly all of Europe was at war. Germany and Austria-Hungary stood against Russia. France and Britain? Italy hesitated, claiming that the war was defensive and therefore did not require its participation. The Ottoman Empire watched from the sidelines, waiting to see who would prevail. Only a few still believed that the conflict would be short. In the capitals of Europe, scenes of celebration unfolded. Crowds filled the streets. In the hours after the assassination, confusion and disbelief spread through Vienna. The Austrian Emperor, Franz Joseph, was old and wary. He had ruled for nearly 7 decades, watching his empire crumble from within. The death of his nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, struck him deeply, but more than sorrow, it awakened fear. The old monarch understood that the fragile empire he ruled could not survive another shock. But in the marble halls of power, sorrow soon hardened into rage. The generals and ministers of Austria-Hungary saw the murder not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a chance to crush Serbia once and for all. For years, they had watched the small Balkan kingdom grow bolder, spreading nationalist ideas that threatened to tear the empire apart from within. Now, they had the perfect excuse. In Vienna's Foreign Office, officials spoke in coded words. A final reckoning, a necessary lesson. Behind their polished manners hid a single desire: war. Yet Austria could not act alone. Serbia had powerful friends, especially Russia, the self-proclaimed protector of all Slavs. Any move against Serbia risked drawing the Russian Empire into conflict. And behind Russia stood France, bound by treaty. If Austria attacked Serbia, Germany might have to defend her ally. The nightmare of a general European war loomed like a storm cloud. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II watched the crisis unfold with impatience. The German emperor, proud and impulsive, believed in strength and destiny. To him, war was not a disaster but a cleansing fire. He viewed Austria as Germany's faithful companion. Our only true friend, he often said. When Vienna hesitated, Wilhelm urged them forward. Now or never, he wrote. Serbia must be crushed. Germany promised full support, giving Austria a so-called blank check, a guarantee of unconditional backing, no matter the consequences. It was a fatal promise. For 3 weeks, Vienna hesitated, fearing the reaction of Europe. But as July dragged on, the pressure grew unbearable. The Hawks demanded action. The world waited, holding its breath. Then, on July 23, 1914, Austria-Hungary delivered an ultimatum to Serbia. A list of demands so harsh that no sovereign nation could accept them all. It accused Serbia of harboring terrorists, demanded that Austrian officials participate in investigations on Serbian soil, and insisted on measures that would effectively destroy Serbia's independence. Europe watched in shock. The press called it a pistol pointed at Serbia's heart. Serbia's government, desperate to avoid war, agreed to almost every demand. All but one. They could not allow foreign police to operate within their borders. To accept that would mean national humiliation. But Vienna was not interested in peace. On July 28, the emperor signed the declaration of war. Artillery began to thunder along the Danube River. Shells exploded over Belgrade. The world was changing, minute by minute. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II faced a terrible choice. His generals and ministers demanded mobilization to protect Serbia. He hesitated, writing desperate letters to his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm. Still hoping for peace. I beg you, he wrote, do not let your troops march. Wilhelm replied with equal urgency. The responsibility for peace rests in your hands. But both were prisoners of their own empires. On July 30th, Russia ordered a general mobilization. Across the vast empire, millions of men received summonses to war. Trains began to move. In Berlin, alarms rang. Germany's war plans depended on speed. If Russia mobilized, Germany had to act immediately. Otherwise, the entire Schlieffen Plan would collapse. 2 days later, on August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. Crowds filled the streets of Berlin, cheering and waving flags. The Kaiser appeared on his palace balcony, shouting, "I no longer see parties. I see only Germans." The crowds roared. But behind the cheers lay a darker truth. No one truly understood what they were celebrating. Within 48 hours, the machinery of destruction spread across the continent. France, bound to Russia, began mobilization. Germany demanded that Belgium allow German troops to pass through its territory. The key to the Schlieffen Plan. The Belgian government refused, defending its neutrality under international law. On August 3, Germany declared war on France and invaded Belgium. The next day, August 4, Britain entered the war after Germany's troops crossed Belgian soil. The lamps went out across Europe. As the British Foreign Minister famously said that night, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." In just 1 week, the assassination of an archduke had set the world on fire. Across continents, men packed their bags, kissed their families goodbye, and boarded trains to the front. Poets and school teachers, farmers and factory workers, all marched with the same illusion, that they would be home by Christmas. But there would be no Christmas peace. The old world of empires, monarchs, and pride had chosen its path. The nations of Europe had written their own death warrant, signed in the blood of millions. In early August, the first shells fell, and the earth trembled. The Great War had begun. When the war began in August 1914, Europe moved as if in a dream. Millions of men marched beneath fluttering flags and brass bands. Newspapers spoke of glory, of duty, of honor. Schoolboys waved their caps, and girls threw flowers at the soldiers as trains rolled toward the front. Every capital city pulsed with patriotic fever. In Berlin, men shouted, "To Paris." In Paris, crowds answered, "To Berlin." Across Vienna, London, and St. Petersburg, the same illusion echoed, that the war would be over in a few months, that courage and discipline would bring a swift victory. But the world was about to awaken to a new kind of war. A war of machines, not men. Germany's great gamble, the Schlieffen Plan, was in motion. Thousands of trains carried soldiers west through the night. The plan was simple in theory but ruthless in execution. Sweep through neutral Belgium, crush France in 6 weeks, then turn east to face Russia. Speed was everything. Delay meant disaster. But Belgium refused to surrender. Its small army, barely a fraction of Germany's size, stood firm. When German troops crossed the border, they met unexpected resistance. In the ancient fortress city of Liege, Belgian soldiers fought with desperate courage. The Germans responded with overwhelming force, bombarding the city with the massive Big Bertha guns, whose shells weighed a ton and could level a fortress in a single blast. The destruction shocked the world. For the first time, Europe witnessed the face of industrial war. Villages burned, civilians fled, and the age of chivalry vanished in smoke. Britain, bound by its treaty to defend Belgium, entered the war. The British Expeditionary Force, small but professional, landed in France. They would soon face the full weight of Germany's army. As August turned to September, the German advance seemed unstoppable. Cities fell one by one. Liège, Brussels, Namur. Refugees clogged the roads. France prepared for the worst. The government fled Paris, fearing that German troops would soon march beneath the Eiffel Tower. But fate turned on the banks of the Marne River. In early September, the French army, exhausted and retreating, made a final stand. General Joseph Joffre, calm and implacable, ordered his men to hold at any cost. No retreat, he said. The hour has come to die where we stand. Taxis from Paris were commandeered to carry soldiers to the front. The battle that followed, the First Battle of the Marne, changed the course of the war. For the first time, the German army was stopped. Both sides suffered enormous losses. By the time the smoke cleared, over 500,000 men were dead or wounded. The German advance had failed. The dream of a quick victory was over. As the armies dug in, the Western Front was born, a scar across Europe stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Soldiers dug trenches deep into the earth, lined with mud, rats, and fear. Between them lay a wasteland of wire and corpses. No man's land. The war of movement became a war of stagnation. Winter came, and with it, the end of illusion. The machine gun ruled the battlefield. Men charged bravely, only to be cut down in minutes. Artillery thundered day and night, turning fields into craters and forests into skeletons. Gas masks appeared. Horses vanished. Humanity disappeared beneath steel and smoke. On Christmas Eve, 1914, a strange silence fell. Along the Western Front, British and German soldiers began to sing, faintly, softly, carols that drifted across the frozen fields. Still night, silent night. Quote, then something miraculous happened. Men climbed from their trenches, unarmed. They shook hands, exchanged gifts, even played football in the snow. For a few brief hours, the war stopped. But by morning, it was over. The generals forbade such truces. The guns roared again. The world had entered a nightmare from which it would not wake for 4 long years. In the East, war raged with equal fury. Russia mobilized faster than Germany had expected, invading East Prussia. At Tannenberg, the German generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff encircled and annihilated an entire Russian army. Over 90,000 men captured, 30,000 killed. The Russian commander, Samsonov, shot himself in despair. The Eastern Front was vast and fluid, stretching across forests and frozen plains. There were victories and defeats, but no end in sight. In the south, Austria-Hungary struggled. Its armies stumbled in the mountains of Serbia, losing battle after battle. The empire that had started the war was already bleeding. And far beyond Europe, the flames spread. Japan, seizing its chance, declared war on Germany to take its colonies in the Pacific. In Africa, British and French troops fought German forces in deserts and jungles. From Canada to Australia, from India to New Zealand, the empires called their sons to fight in a war that none of them had started. By the end of 1914, the world was engulfed. Over 1 million men were dead. Entire landscapes had vanished beneath the thunder of artillery. The generals still spoke of glory. The soldiers knew better. They called it simply the war. None yet dared to call it the first.